are diving into one of the most complex and frankly dangerous flashpoints on the entire planet, the Taiwan Strait. It's this incredible mix of military strategy, our global tech addiction, and a really deep historical fight over sovereignty. And honestly, getting a handle on what's at stake here is pretty much essential to understanding where the 21st century is heading. But let's start with a simple question, just to bring this all down to earth. What if the little electronic brains that power, well, everything, the phone in your hand, your car, the entire internet, even the future of AI, what if they all just, poof, disappeared overnight?
Because if that happened, this is the number that would suddenly define our world. Over 90%. That's the share of the world's most advanced, most powerful semiconductors that are made in just one place. You guessed it, Taiwan. It's a technological choke point that has no parallel in modern history.
So how did a single island get this much power? To understand that, we actually have to rewind the clock. The first piece of this puzzle is political. It's all rooted in the historical claims that Beijing has over Taiwan. And this isn't some new disagreement. It's more like the final simmering chapter of a war that never really came to a complete end. Here's the backstory in a nutshell. When the Chinese Civil War wrapped up on the mainland back in 1949, the losing side, the nationalists, fled to Taiwan. And ever since then, Beijing has seen the island not as its own country, but as a breakaway province. The last piece of the puzzle they need to put back in place to make China whole again. And believe me, this is not just some dusty old historical grievance. President Xi Jinping has put this front and center. He's tied the reunification of the motherland directly to his grand vision of national rejuvenation. The message is clear. For the Communist Party, a strong, restored China is simply incomplete as long as Taiwan is separate. And the diplomatic tool for this claim is the One China principle. Think of this as the non-negotiable rule of the road for any country that wants to have a relationship with Beijing. It forces everyone to acknowledge their position, and it shapes every single international conversation about Taiwan. Okay, so that's the history. Now let's shift gears to the second piece of the puzzle, which brings us right into the modern day. This is where Taiwan isn't just a historical issue, but a global economic powerhouse. This is what people call the Silicon Shield. Just take a look at this chart. It really gives you a sense of the scale we're talking about. Taiwan produces something like 60% of all semiconductors on Earth. That is a massive, massive share. It makes them an absolutely critical link in pretty much every electronics supply chain you can think of. But here's where the numbers get even more mind-blowing. If we narrow it down to just the most advanced, highest-end chips, the ones you need for AI, for supercomputers, for next-generation military tech, well, Taiwan's dominance, mainly through its legendary company TSMC, just skyrockets to over 90%. I mean, it's simple. If you control these chips, you basically control the future of technology. All right, let's pivot to our third pillar, geography. Because where Taiwan sits on the map is every bit as important as the chips it makes. It's a key square on a giant geopolitical chessboard. And to really get Taiwan's strategic importance, you have to know this one key term, the first island chain. The easiest way to think about it is like a huge natural wall, a string of islands that basically boxes in China's navy and makes it much harder for them to get out into the open Pacific. And this map just lays it all out perfectly. You can see that chain of islands running all the way from Japan down to the Philippines. And smack in the middle, the most critical link in that chain is Taiwan. For China's military planners, it's like the cork in the bottle. If they could control Taiwan, they could break that chain and project their naval power freely across the entire Pacific Ocean. That brings us to our fourth and final pillar, and this one is all about ideas. It's ideological. Because beyond the history, the tech, and the geography, Taiwan represents a fundamental challenge to the Chinese Communist Party's story about itself and its right to rule. Think about it. Taiwan is a vibrant, successful, Mandarin-speaking democracy. Its very existence acts as this powerful, living counterargument to Beijing's claim that a one-party system is the only way to govern a Chinese society. It's proof that there is another way. And this slide really shows you the stark contrast. On one side, you have the CCP's model, which says its legitimacy comes from providing stability and national unity. And on the other, you have Taiwan's democratic model, which has free elections, freedom of speech, and peaceful transfers of power. The success of Taiwan's system can't help but raise questions about the necessity of the other. For a long time, Beijing's offer was something called one country, two systems. But then the world watched what happened in Hong Kong. The crackdown there basically destroyed the credibility of that promise. For almost everyone in Taiwan, it was a flashing red light. a warning that any deal to protect their autonomy could be taken away at any time. So, we've got the politics, the silicon, the strategy, and the ideology. We've seen the four drivers. Now, let's get to the final section and talk about the stakes. Because this is a global gamble with just unbelievably high consequences for all of us. A war over Taiwan wouldn't just be a regional conflict. It would be a global economic earthquake. Some serious estimates suggest a full-scale war could vaporize a staggering 10% of global GDP. Now, to put that in perspective, that's a bigger hit than the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID pandemic combined. It would touch every single economy on Earth. And the economic damage just gets worse depending on how bad things get. Even a so-called minor conflict, like a naval blockade, would wreck supply chains and cause panic in financial markets. But a major war, an actual invasion, we are talking about total supply chain collapse, massive trade embargoes, and a crisis that could easily throw the entire world into a new Great Depression. But what's really interesting is that the biggest thing holding Beijing back might not be the U.S. Navy, but the risk at home. A miscalculation, a war that stalls or goes badly, could unleash chaos inside China itself. It could cause massive economic instability, derail the Chinese dream, and even threaten the Communist Party's grip on power. So keeping things stable at home might just be the ultimate priority. Which brings us to the final critical question we have to ask ourselves. Right now, countries around the world are trying to de-risk, to build their own chip factories and become less dependent on Taiwan. So, does this make war less likely because the economic stakes get a little lower? Or, from Beijing's point of view, does it create a ticking clock, a closing window of opportunity to act before that powerful silicon shield loses some of its leverage? That right there is the incredibly dangerous calculation facing the entire world today. Today,